The crumpled note in Rebecca Graham's trembling hand had only 5 words written in her husband's careful script, but those 5 words had shattered her world completely. "You are losing your mind." She stood in the doorway of their small ranch house outside Weaverville, California, watching the dust settle on the road where Thomas's wagon had disappeared an hour ago, taking with it 7 years of marriage, all their savings, and apparently his belief in her sanity. It was spring of 1876, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dry earth. Rebecca was 24 years old, and until this morning she had believed her marriage was solid, built on trust and companionship. She had been wrong. The note explained nothing else, offered no comfort, no forwarding address. Just those 5 cruel words that made her question everything she knew about herself. Her hands shook as she read the note again, as if the words might have changed in the last few minutes. They had not. She sank onto the wooden step, her dark brown hair coming loose from its pins, her calico dress dusty from the morning's chores. The chickens clucked nearby, oblivious to her pain. The 2 horses in the corral stamped their feet, waiting for their evening feed. Life continued around her as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Rebecca had spent the past 6 months trying to convince Thomas that something was wrong with the ranch, that things were happening that could not be explained by coincidence or forgetfulness. Tools went missing and reappeared in strange places. The horses grew skittish at night. She heard footsteps when Thomas was away in town. Food disappeared from the larder, but Thomas had dismissed every concern, every worry, every piece of evidence she brought to him. He said she was imagining things. He said she was overwrought. He said she needed to calm herself. And now he had left her, declaring her insane in a note he did not even have the courage to deliver in person. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Rebecca looked up, wiping at her eyes quickly, not wanting whoever it was to see her crying. A lone rider approached from the north, silhouetted against the bright sky. As he drew closer, she could make out a tall figure on a gray horse, wearing a dusty trail coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. The rider slowed as he neared the house, and Rebecca stood, smoothing her dress instinctively. She was alone now, and a woman alone had to be careful. But something about the way the man sat his horse spoke of weariness rather than threat. "Afternoon, madam," the rider called out, tipping his hat as he brought his horse to a stop near the fence. "I am looking for the Graham Ranch. Would this be it?" Rebecca's throat was tight, but she managed to speak. "It is, or it was. What business do you have here?" The man dismounted, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. As he came closer, she could see he was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all hard angles and strong lines softened slightly by the dust of the trail. "Name is Xavier Sutton, madam. I have a letter here for Thomas Graham from a business associate in Sacramento. I was heading this way regardless, so I agreed to deliver it." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Is Mr. Graham available?" Rebecca felt a bitter laugh escape her throat before she could stop it. "Mr. Graham is not available, Mr. Sutton. Mr. Graham left this morning and did not say where he was going or when he might return." Xavier's eyes narrowed slightly, and his gaze moved from her face to the crumpled paper still clutched in her hand. "I see. I am sorry to hear that, madam. Should I leave this letter with you, or would you prefer I try to track him down?" "You can leave it," Rebecca said, her voice hollow, "though I cannot promise it will reach him any time soon." Xavier nodded and climbed the steps to hand her the envelope. As he did, a gust of wind caught the note in her hand and sent it fluttering toward him. His reflexes were quick, and he caught it before it could blow away. But in catching it, he had seen the words written there. Rebecca watched his face as he read those 5 words. His expression darkened, and when he looked up at her, there was something fierce in his eyes that had not been there before. "He left you this?" Xavier asked, his voice low and controlled. Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks, shame and anger warring within her. "He did. This morning." "That is all the explanation I received." Xavier looked at the note again, then back at her face. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his words were deliberate and certain. "He is crazy for leaving you." Rebecca blinked, stunned into silence. Of all the things she had expected this stranger to say, that was not among them. She had expected pity, perhaps, or awkwardness, or a hasty departure. Not this quiet, fierce defense from a man who did not know her at all. "You do not know me," she managed to say. "You do not know if what he says is true." "I know a coward when I see one," Xavier replied, handing the note back to her carefully. "A man who would leave his wife with nothing but a cruel note and no explanation is a coward, plain and simple, and a fool besides." Rebecca felt tears threaten again, but these were different from the tears she had shed earlier. These came from a place of relief, of validation, of being seen and believed after months of being dismissed and doubted. She swallowed hard and looked away, not trusting herself to speak. Xavier seemed to sense her struggle. He took a step back, giving her space. "Forgive me, Mrs. Graham, I have overstepped. It is not my place to comment on your personal affairs." "No," Rebecca said quickly, finding her voice. "No, you have not overstepped. I appreciate your words more than you can know, Mr. Sutton. It has been a very long time since anyone believed me about anything." Something in her tone must have caught his attention because Xavier looked at her more closely. "What do you mean by that?" Rebecca hesitated. She had just met this man. She had no reason to trust him with her troubles. But something about his direct gaze and his unhesitating defense of her made her want to talk, to finally tell someone the whole truth without fear of being dismissed or patronized. "May I offer you some water, Mr. Sutton? You look as though you have been riding for some time, and if you have a few minutes to spare, I would appreciate someone to talk to. I have been alone with my thoughts for too long today, and they are not good company." Xavier studied her for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. "I would appreciate some water, madam, and I have time. My business in Weaverville can wait another day." Rebecca led him around to the side of the house where a pump stood near a trough. She worked the handle while Xavier cupped his hands under the flow, drinking deeply. Then she filled a ladle and drank herself, the cool water soothing her raw throat. "Come inside," she said. "It is too hot to stand out here in the sun." The house was simple but well kept, with whitewashed walls and calico curtains at the windows. Rebecca gestured to a chair at the rough wooden table while she moved to the stove, stirring up the fire to make coffee. Her hands needed something to do, and the familiar ritual helped settle her nerves. Xavier removed his hat and set it on the table, running a hand through his dark hair. "How long were you married, if you do not mind my asking?" 7 years, Rebecca said, measuring coffee into the pot. "We married in Pennsylvania, where I am from originally. Thomas wanted to come west to start fresh, to make his fortune. We bought this land 3 years ago with money his father left him. It was supposed to be our new beginning." "And was it?" Rebecca paused, considering the question. "For a while, yes, or I thought it was. Thomas was a good husband in many ways. He worked hard, he provided, but he was not a man who listened well, especially not to his wife." "What would he not listen to?" Xavier asked, his tone gentle but interested. Rebecca brought 2 tin cups to the table and sat down across from him. The whole story came pouring out then, everything she had kept inside for months. She told him about the missing tools that would reappear days later in places she knew she had already searched. She told him about the horses acting strange at night, whinnying and stamping as if they sensed something wrong. She told him about the footsteps she heard around the house when she was alone, the shadow she saw moving past the window, the feeling of being watched that made her skin crawl. Thomas said I was imagining it all, she continued, her voice tight with remembered frustration. He said I was lonely out here, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw, Mr. Sutton. I know what I heard. I am not losing my mind. Xavier was quiet for a long moment after she finished. The coffee pot began to boil, and Rebecca rose to pour it, her hand steadier now that she had told someone the truth. When she set the cups down, Xavier wrapped his hands around his and looked at her directly. I believe you, he said simply. Rebecca felt something loosen in her chest. You do? I have spent enough time in wild country to know that strange things happen, and not all of them can be explained easily. And I have known enough men like your husband to recognize the pattern. When a man does not want to deal with a problem, it is easier for him to convince himself that the problem does not exist. And if his wife keeps insisting there is a problem, well, then the problem must be her. That is exactly what happened, Rebecca said, her voice trembling slightly. He made me feel as though I was going mad. Every time I brought up something strange, he would get this look on his face, this patient, condescending look that made me feel small and foolish. By the end, I started to doubt myself. I started to wonder if maybe he was right, if maybe I was seeing things that were not there. But you were not, Xavier said firmly. Someone has been harassing you, Mrs. Graham. The question is who and why. Rebecca stared at him. You think someone is doing this deliberately? I do. What you have described sounds like someone trying to frighten you, or drive you away, or both. Have you had any disputes with neighbors? Anyone who might want this land? Rebecca thought back over the past year. There is a man named Victor who owns the property to the east. He made Thomas an offer to buy our land about 6 months ago. Thomas refused, said we were not interested in selling. Victor was not pleased, but I did not think much of it at the time. 6 months ago, Xavier repeated. And when did the strange things start happening? Rebecca's eyes widened. About 6 months ago, Xavier nodded slowly. That is quite a coincidence. But why would he do that? If he frightens us away, the land still belongs to us. It does not help him. Unless he frightens you away and then makes another offer, this time much lower, for abandoned property. Or unless he waits until you cannot pay your taxes and the land goes up for auction. There are many ways to acquire land from people who have been driven off it, Mrs. Graham. None of them legal, but out here, the law is often far away and easy to avoid. Rebecca felt anger rising in her chest, hot and fierce. So Thomas left me because this Victor has been tormenting us, and instead of standing and fighting, he decided I was the problem. It appears that way, yes. That coward, Rebecca said, her voice shaking with rage. That absolute coward. Xavier took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. What do you want to do, Mrs. Graham? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, do you want to leave? Pack up and go somewhere else, start over? Or do you want to stay and fight for what is yours? Rebecca looked around the little house she had worked so hard to make into a home. She thought of the garden she had planted, the chickens she had raised from chicks, the curtains she had sewn by hand. She thought of all the dreams she had poured into this place, all the hope that it represented. And she thought of the cruel note that Thomas had left her, declaring her insane rather than believing her or supporting her. I want to stay, she said, her voice strong and clear. This is my home. I will not be driven away by some bully who wants my land, and I will not be defined by the cowardice of a husband who abandoned me." A slow smile spread across Xavier's face, and Rebecca saw approval in his eyes. "Good. Then you are going to need help. A woman alone cannot defend a ranch against a determined man with bad intentions." "Are you offering to help me, Mr. Sutton?" Rebecca asked, hardly daring to hope. "I am. My business in Weaverville is not urgent, and I have never been able to abide a bully. If you are willing to have me stay on for a while, I would be honored to help you put things right here." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes again, but she blinked them back. "I cannot pay you much. Thomas took most of our money when he left." "I do not need much," Xavier said. "Room and board will do, and perhaps a small wage if you can manage it. I'm not doing this for money, Mrs. Graham. I am doing this because it is the right thing to do." Rebecca extended her hand across the table, and Xavier took it, his grip firm and warm. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Sutton." "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," Xavier said quietly, and something in his eyes made Rebecca's breath catch. But then he released her hand and stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Now show me around the property. I want to know the lay of the land before nightfall." They spent the next few hours walking the ranch together. The property was not large, perhaps 80 acres total, but it was good land with water access from a nearby creek. The house sat near the center, with the barn and corral to the south and fields stretching to the north and east. To the west, a line of pine trees marked the boundary with unclaimed wilderness. Xavier examined everything with a careful eye, noting the sight lines from the house, the places where someone could approach unseen, the condition of the fences and outbuildings. Rebecca found herself watching him as much as she watched the land, noting the competent way he moved, the thoughtful questions he asked, the genuine interest he showed in understanding her home. "Victor's property is that way," Rebecca said, pointing east toward a larger ranch house visible in the distance. "He runs cattle about twice as many head as we do, or did. Thomas sold most of ours over the winter. Did he say why? He said we needed the money. But now I wonder if he was not already planning to leave, if he was not already giving up." Xavier frowned. "Has Victor approached you since Thomas left?" "No, he does not know yet. No one does. It only happened this morning. Word will spread quickly in a place like this. When it does, you can expect Victor to come calling with another offer." "And what should I tell him?" "Tell him the truth, that you are not interested in selling. Be polite but firm. Do not let him see that you are afraid or alone." "But I am alone," Rebecca said quietly. Xavier turned to face her fully. "No, you are not. I am here, and I will make sure Victor knows it. A woman with help is a much different proposition than a woman truly alone." They returned to the house as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Rebecca prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and they ate together at the table, talking about inconsequential things. Xavier told her about his work as a courier and occasional ranch hand, traveling from job to job throughout California and Nevada. Rebecca told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a shopkeeper, her quiet childhood so different from the wild frontier life she now led. After supper, Xavier insisted on checking the barn and the perimeter one more time before full dark. Rebecca stood on the porch and watched him move through the gathering shadows, his figure alert and capable. She felt safer than she had in months, and the realization brought both comfort and confusion. She had known this man for less than a day, yet she trusted him in a way she had not trusted her own husband by the end. When Xavier returned, he found her still standing on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself against the cooling air. "Everything looks secure," he reported. I will bed down in the barn if that is acceptable. That way I can hear if anyone approaches the horses." "That is fine," Rebecca said. "There are blankets in the chest by the door. Take what you need." Xavier nodded and moved to gather the blankets, but before he left, he turned back to her. "Mrs. Graham, I want you to know something. You are not crazy. You are not imagining things. You are a woman who saw the truth and had the courage to speak it, even when the person you trusted most in the world refused to listen. That does not make you insane. It makes you brave." Rebecca felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she could not quite name. "Thank you, Mr. Sutton, for everything." "Xavier," he said with a slight smile, "if we are going to be working together, you should call me Xavier. Only if you call me Rebecca." "Rebecca," he repeated, and the way he said her name with such care and respect made something flutter in her stomach. "Good night, Rebecca. If you need anything, I will be right outside." That night, for the first time in months, Rebecca slept soundly. She did not wake at every creak of the house or rustle of wind. She did not lie awake wondering if she was losing her mind. She simply slept, knowing that someone was watching over her, someone who believed her and would help her fight. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Rebecca woke early and dressed quickly, pinning her hair up and splashing water on her face. She had work to do, and for the first time in a long time, she felt equal to the task. Xavier was already up, she discovered when she stepped outside. He had fed the horses and was mending a section of fence near the corral. He looked up when he heard her approach and touched his hat in greeting. "Morning. I hope you do not mind. I saw this needed fixing." "Not at all, thank you." Rebecca watched him work for a moment, impressed by his efficiency. "I am making breakfast. Come in when you are ready." Over breakfast of eggs and bacon, they discussed their plans for the day. Xavier wanted to ride into Weaverville to complete his original business, and also to make some discreet inquiries about Victor and any other potential trouble. "You should come with me," he said. "Let people see that you are not hiding away. Let them see that you have help now." Rebecca hesitated. Part of her wanted to hide, to avoid the gossip and speculation that she knew would come once word spread about Thomas leaving. But Xavier was right. If she was going to stay and fight for her home, she could not afford to seem weak or defeated. "All right," she agreed. "Give me a few minutes to change into something more presentable." They rode into Weaverville together an hour later, Rebecca on her bay mare and Xavier on his gray gelding. The town was bustling with morning activity, miners and merchants and families going about their business. Rebecca felt eyes turning toward them as they rode down the main street, felt the weight of curious gazes and whispered conversations. Xavier seemed unbothered by the attention. He helped her dismount in front of the general store with the easy courtesy of a gentleman, his hand steady on her elbow. "I have business at the assay office," he told her. "Will you be all right here for a bit?" "I will be fine," Rebecca assured him. She had shopping to do anyway, supplies she needed if she was going to keep the ranch running. Inside the store, the proprietor, a round man named Mr. Chen, greeted her with his usual friendly smile. "Mrs. Graham, good morning. What can I get for you today?" Rebecca gave him her list and wandered the store while he gathered the items. She was examining a bolt of fabric when she heard the door open behind her and felt the atmosphere in the store change, become heavier somehow. "Mrs. Graham," a deep voice said. "What a pleasant surprise." Rebecca turned to find Victor standing behind her. He was a large man, heavily built, with a thick brown beard and small, calculating eyes. He smiled at her, but there was no warmth in it. "Mr. Victor," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Good morning. I heard Thomas rode out yesterday, heading to Sacramento on business, I am told. Left you here all alone." Victor took a step closer, and Rebecca fought the urge to step back. That does not seem right, a woman alone out on that ranch, dangerous even. I am managing just fine, thank you, Rebecca said coolly. Are you, though? Because I have been thinking, with Thomas gone and all, maybe now would be a good time to reconsider my offer for your land. I would give you a fair price, more than fair really, and you could head back east where you belong. A woman like you was not meant for this hard life. There it was, exactly as Xavier had predicted. Rebecca felt anger flare in her chest, but she kept her expression calm. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Victor, but as I understand it, my husband already told you we are not interested in selling. That has not changed. Victor's smile faded slightly. Thomas is not here to make decisions anymore, though, is he? You are alone, Mrs. Graham. Alone and unprotected. Anything could happen out there. The threat was barely veiled, and Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. But before she could respond, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. She is not alone. Xavier stood in the entrance, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. He crossed the store in a few long strides and took his place beside Rebecca, close enough that she could feel the solid warmth of him. "And who might you be?" Victor asked, his eyes narrowing. "Xavier Sutton. I am working at the Graham Ranch now. Anything you need to discuss with Mrs. Graham you can discuss in front of me." Victor looked between them, his expression darkening. "Is that so? Well, well, you work fast, Mrs. Graham. Your husband barely out the door and you have already found a replacement." Rebecca felt her cheeks flame, but Xavier spoke before she could. His voice was quiet but carried an edge that made even Mr. Chen look up from behind his counter. "Watch your mouth, Victor. Mrs. Graham is a respectable woman and I will not hear her honor questioned. If you have business to conduct, conduct it with respect. Otherwise, I suggest you leave." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other and Rebecca held her breath. Victor was larger, but there was something dangerous in Xavier's stillness, something that suggested he knew exactly how to handle himself in a fight. Finally, Victor backed down, though his face was flushed with anger. "This is not over. That land should be mine, and one way or another it will be." "Is that a threat?" Xavier asked, his voice still quiet. "Take it however you want," Victor snarled, and he turned and stormed out of the store, slamming the door behind him. Rebecca let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Xavier turned to her, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thank you. He has never been quite that direct before. He is getting desperate. That makes him more dangerous, but it also means he is more likely to make mistakes." Xavier glanced at Mr. Chen, who was watching them with wide eyes. "Did you hear that exchange, Mr. Chen?" "I did, Mr. Sutton. I heard every word." "Good. Remember it. Mrs. Graham may need witnesses before this is done." They completed their business and rode back to the ranch in thoughtful silence. Rebecca's mind was churning, processing everything that had happened. She was angry at Victor's boldness, frightened by his thinly veiled threats, but also strangely exhilarated. For months, she had been gaslit and dismissed, her fears treated as hysteria. Now, finally, someone was taking her seriously. Someone was standing beside her. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Xavier worked the ranch alongside Rebecca, mending fences, tending the few remaining cattle, repairing the barn roof that had been leaking. He was a tireless worker and good company besides. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their disappointments. Rebecca learned that Xavier had been orphaned young and raised by an uncle who taught him ranch work. He had been drifting for years, never quite finding a place to settle. "Why not?" Rebecca asked one afternoon as they worked in the garden, pulling weeds from between the vegetable rows. "Why have you never settled anywhere?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling in the dirt. I suppose I never found a reason compelling enough to stop moving, or maybe I was afraid to. When you drift, you do not get hurt. You do not lose anything because you never had anything to lose. That sounds like a lonely way to live, Rebecca said softly. It is, Xavier admitted, looking at her directly, but safe. Safe is not the same as happy. No, he agreed. It is not. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a recognition. Rebecca felt her heart beat faster and looked away, focusing on the weeds with more intensity than they required. She was still married, technically, even if Thomas had abandoned her. She had no business feeling what she was beginning to feel for Xavier Sutton, but she could not help it. Every day, her admiration for him grew. He was patient and kind, strong but gentle. He listened when she spoke and took her opinions seriously. He made her laugh with his dry humor and made her feel safe with his steady presence. After years of being dismissed and diminished by Thomas, Xavier's respect and regard felt like water in a desert, and she was not imagining his own growing feelings for her. She saw it in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, in the way his hand would linger when he helped her over rough ground, in the way his voice softened when he said her name. But neither of them spoke of it. The situation was too complicated, too uncertain. There was still the matter of Victor and the harassment that had driven Thomas away. And there was the question of what would happen when Thomas came back, if he came back. The harassment had stopped since Xavier arrived, Rebecca realized. No more missing tools or strange noises in the night. Either Victor had been frightened off by Xavier's presence, or he was biding his time, waiting for an opportunity. That opportunity came one night in late June. Rebecca woke to the sound of the horses screaming. She was out of bed and pulling on her robe before her sleep-fogged brain had fully processed the sound. She ran to the window and saw orange light flickering in the darkness. Fire. The barn was on fire. Rebecca ran for the door, her heart pounding with terror. The horses were in there, trapped. She had to get them out. But as she wrenched open the door, she nearly collided with Xavier, who was running toward the barn from the direction of the bunkhouse where he had been sleeping. "Stay here," he shouted at her over the roar of the flames, but Rebecca was already running after him. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Xavier reached the barn door first and hauled it open. The two horses inside were panicking, rearing and kicking in their stalls. "Get back," Xavier shouted at Rebecca, but she ignored him, running to her mare's stall. The horses' eyes were white with terror, but Rebecca managed to get the stall door open and grab the halter. She led the mare out of the barn at a run, the animal nearly trampling her in its panic. By the time she got the mare to safety, Xavier was leading his gelding out. The entire barn was engulfed now, flames shooting high into the night sky. There was no saving it, no water source close enough or large enough to make a difference. They could only watch as it burned. Xavier stood beside her, both of them breathing hard, their faces smudged with soot. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders, checking for injuries. "No, I am fine. I am all right." Xavier's jaw was tight with fury as he watched the barn burn. "This was deliberate. I smelled kerosene." Rebecca felt cold despite the heat of the fire. "Victor?" "Almost certainly. He waited until he thought I was asleep, snuck in and set the fire. But you were not asleep." "No, I have been keeping watch at night, sleeping in shifts. Something told me he would try something soon." Xavier turned to look at her, his face grim in the firelight. "This has gone beyond harassment, Rebecca. This is attempted murder. If those horses had died in there, if you had run in without me, you could have been killed." Rebecca was shaking now, the full horror of what had almost happened sinking in. Xavier pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. She went willingly, pressing her face into his shirt, breathing in the smell of smoke and sweat and something essentially him. "We have to go to the sheriff," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "We will. First thing in the morning. This time, Victor has gone too far. Even out here, arson is taken seriously." They stood like that until the fire burned itself out, leaving only smoldering ruins where the barn had stood. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east by the time the last flames died. They secured the horses in the corral and went into the house to clean up and wait for full daylight. Rebecca made coffee with shaking hands while Xavier washed the soot from his face at the basin. When they sat down at the table, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in their systems, Xavier reached across and took her hand. "I am sorry I did not prevent this," he said quietly. "You saved our lives," Rebecca replied. "If you had not been watching, if you had not been here, we would both be dead. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have anticipated he would try fire. It is the oldest trick in the book for this kind of intimidation. Xavier." Rebecca squeezed his hand until he looked at her. "This is not your fault. It is Victor's fault. He is the one who should be apologizing, and he is the one who is going to face justice." They rode into Weaverville at first light, going straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Morrison was a grizzled old lawman who had been keeping the peace in Weaverville since before the Civil War. He listened to their story with a grave expression, taking notes in a careful hand. "You say you smelled kerosene?" he asked Xavier. "I did, and I found these near the barn." Xavier pulled some burned pieces of fabric from his pocket. "Looks like rags that were used to set the fire." "They reek of kerosene." Sheriff Morrison examined the evidence and nodded slowly. "I will need to pay a visit to Victor's place, see if he has kerosene stored there. But I have to warn you, Mrs. Graham, unless I find solid evidence linking him to this fire, there is not much I can do. Victor is a powerful man in these parts. He has friends. So I should just accept that he tried to kill me?" Rebecca demanded, her voice rising with frustration. "No, madam, but I am telling you how things work. Without proof, it is your word against his. And no offense, but with your husband having left you like he did, folks might question your judgment." Rebecca felt her anger spike dangerously. "My husband left because Victor was harassing us and Thomas was too much of a coward to stay and fight. Now Victor is escalating because he thinks I am an easy target. I am not imagining this, Sheriff. This is really happening." "I believe you," Sheriff Morrison said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I do, and I will investigate, but I want you to understand the reality of the situation. If I cannot find proof, this might come down to who is more believable, and that is not always fair." They left the sheriff's office feeling discouraged but determined. As they walked back to their horses, Xavier said quietly, "He is right about one thing, we need more proof. We need to catch Victor in the act. How do we do that? We set a trap. We make him think he has another opportunity and we catch him trying to take it." "That is dangerous," Rebecca said, though she could see the logic in it. "Everything about this situation is dangerous. But I would rather be proactive than wait for him to try again." They spent the rest of the day cleaning up the remains of the barn and securing what they could of their property. Word had spread about the fire, and several neighbors came by to offer help and sympathy. Not everyone in the community was in Victor's pocket, Rebecca realized. There were good people here, people who would stand with her if it came to that. One of those people was Clara Mitchell, a widow who ran a small farm to the west. She arrived in the afternoon with food and a sharp, assessing eye. "I never liked Victor," she told Rebecca bluntly as they stood in the kitchen. "Man is too full of himself, thinks he owns the whole valley. If he did this to you, and I believe he did, then he needs to answer for it." "Thank you, Clara. It means a lot to hear someone say that. You are not alone in this, Rebecca. Remember that. There are plenty of us who are tired of bullies getting away with whatever they want just because they have money and connections. After Clara left, Rebecca found Xavier checking the perimeter of the property again. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. "Xavier," she called out, and he turned to face her. "Can I talk to you about something?" "Of course." He walked over to where she stood near the house, his expression open and attentive. Rebecca took a breath, trying to gather her thoughts. This had been building for weeks, and after last night's close call, she could not keep it inside any longer. "I need to thank you, properly, for everything you have done. You have given me my life back, my belief in myself. You have stood by me when my own husband would not. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Xavier said quietly. "I did not do this for repayment." "Then why?" Rebecca asked, moving closer to him. "Why did you stay? Why did you help me?" Xavier was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because from the moment I met you, I could not seem to walk away. Because you deserved better than what you had been given. Because every day I spend with you makes me want to stay another day and then another until the idea of leaving feels impossible." Rebecca's breath caught. "Xavier, I know I should not say these things. You are still married. This is not proper. But after last night, after nearly losing you, I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." "And what do you feel?" Rebecca whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. "I feel like I have been drifting my whole life, and I finally found a reason to stop. I feel like every good thing I ever did was leading me to your door. I feel like I am falling in love with you, Rebecca Graham, and I do not want to stop." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks, but they were not sad tears. They were tears of relief, of joy, of finally hearing the words she had been too afraid to hope for. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been for weeks, but I felt so guilty, so confused. Thomas left me, but we are still married, and I did not know if I had the right to feel this way about you." Xavier reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks, his touch infinitely tender. "Thomas gave up his rights when he abandoned you. He does not get to dictate your heart anymore, Rebecca. Only you do." "Then I choose you," Rebecca said, her voice strong despite her tears. "I choose to be happy. I choose to be with someone who believes in me, who respects me, who stands beside me instead of dismissing me. I choose you, Xavier Sutton." Xavier pulled her into his arms then, holding her close. Rebecca wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight, feeling safe and cherished in a way she never had before. They stood like that as the sun set completely and the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other against all odds. When they finally pulled back, Xavier cupped her face in his hands and leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Rebecca did not want to pull away. She rose on her toes and met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle and tender and full of promise. It was a new beginning, a choice made freely and without regret. And in that moment, with Xavier's arms around her and his heart beating steady beneath her palm, Rebecca felt truly free for the first time in years. But their peace was short-lived. Over the next week, tensions continued to escalate. Sheriff Morrison reported that he had found kerosene at Victor's property, but Victor claimed he used it for legitimate ranch purposes and had an alibi for the night of the fire, provided by his ranch hands. It was not enough to arrest him, the sheriff said reluctantly. It was circumstantial at best. Xavier was furious but not surprised. "We need to catch him ourselves. It is the only way." They set their trap carefully. Xavier spread word in town that he would be leaving for Sacramento in 3 days to deliver some cattle for sale, implying that Rebecca would be alone again. He made sure Victor heard the news, made sure everyone knew exactly when he would be gone. But instead of leaving, Xavier planned to stay hidden, watching the ranch from a concealed position. If Victor took the bait and tried something, Xavier would be there to catch him in the act. The night Xavier was supposed to leave, Rebecca stood on the porch and waved goodbye as he rode off toward town. But once he was out of sight of the main road, Xavier doubled back and secreted himself in the tree line to the west, with a clear view of the house and the corral. Rebecca went about her evening routine as normally as possible, lighting lamps and moving around the house so anyone watching would think she was alone. But her nerves were stretched tight, and every sound made her jump. She kept a rifle within reach, loaded and ready. The attack came near midnight. Rebecca heard the horses start to whinny restlessly and moved to the window. In the moonlight, she could see figures approaching the corral, 3 of them. One was unmistakably Victor, his bulk impossible to miss. The other 2 were his ranch hands. They were carrying torches. Rebecca's heart slammed against her ribs, but she forced herself to stay calm. Xavier was out there. He would not let them hurt her. She just had to trust him. The men reached the corral and were spreading out, getting ready to set fires when Xavier's voice rang out clear and commanding in the darkness. "That is far enough, Victor. Drop the torches and put your hands up." The 3 men froze. Victor spun around, his face contorting with rage when he saw Xavier emerging from the shadows, rifle in hand. You were supposed to be gone. Change of plans. Now drop the torches before someone gets hurt." Victor hesitated, weighing his options. His men looked at him uncertainly. For a moment, Rebecca thought he might actually fight, might do something stupid and violent. But then the sound of more horses approaching made everyone turn. Sheriff Morrison rode into view, followed by 2 deputies. He must have been waiting nearby, ready to move once Xavier gave the signal. "Evening, gentlemen," the sheriff said, his voice hard. "Looks like I arrived just in time to witness an attempted arson. Victor, you and your men are under arrest." The fight went out of Victor all at once. He dropped the torch, his shoulders sagging. "It should have been mine," he said bitterly. "That land should have been mine. I offered fair money for it. And when the owners refused to sell, you decided to terrorize them until they left," Sheriff Morrison said flatly. "That is called a crime, Victor. Multiple crimes, in fact." As the deputies moved in to restrain Victor and his men, Rebecca came out of the house. Xavier was at her side immediately, his arm around her shoulders. "It is over," he said quietly. "You are safe now." Rebecca sagged against him, the tension of the past months finally releasing. "We did it." "We actually did it." "You did it," Xavier corrected. "You stood your ground and fought for what was yours. I just helped." Victor was loaded onto a horse, his hands tied. As they prepared to take him to jail in Weaverville, he looked at Rebecca with pure venom in his eyes. "This is not over. I have lawyers, I have money, you have not won." "Actually, I think she has," Xavier said calmly. "You just confessed in front of the sheriff. That is going to be hard to fight in court, lawyers or no lawyers." They watched as Victor was led away into the night. Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat to them. "I will need you both to come in tomorrow and give formal statements, but for tonight, get some rest. You have earned it." After everyone left, Rebecca and Xavier stood in the quiet darkness, the ranch peaceful around them. The nightmare was finally over. Victor would face justice. Rebecca's name would be cleared, and she could finally move forward with her life. "What happens now?" she asked Xavier, still tucked against his side. Now we rebuild. The barn, your life, our future. Whatever you want to happen." "I want you to stay," Rebecca said, looking up at him. "Not as hired help, but as a partner in all of this, if you will have me." Xavier smiled, and in the moonlight he looked younger, happier. Rebecca Graham, I think I've been yours since the moment I read that note and decided any man who would write such a thing was a fool. I am not going anywhere. But I am still married, at least legally. It could be years before I can divorce Thomas if he even agrees to it. Then we will wait, Xavier said simply. I have waited 30 years to find you. I can wait a little longer to make it official. As long as I can be with you, that is enough. They went inside together, and that night, for the first time since Thomas left, Rebecca did not sleep alone. She and Xavier lay together in the bed she had once shared with her husband, but everything was different now. Where Thomas had been cold and dismissive, Xavier was warm and attentive. Where Thomas had made her feel small, Xavier made her feel cherished. They did not make love that night, both agreeing to wait until the legal complications were resolved. But they held each other close, talking in whispers until dawn, making plans for their future. The next morning brought fresh challenges and opportunities. They gave their statements to Sheriff Morrison, who assured them that Victor would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The community rallied around Rebecca, offering help to rebuild the barn and expressing shame that Victor had been allowed to terrorize her for so long. But the biggest surprise came 3 weeks later when a letter arrived from Pennsylvania. Rebecca recognized her mother's handwriting immediately and tore it open with trembling hands. The letter was short but devastating. Thomas had made it back east, the letter explained. He had been staying with his cousin in Philadelphia. But a week ago, he had been killed in an accident at the rail yard where he had found work. The funeral had already taken place. Rebecca was a widow. She sat down hard at the kitchen table, the letter fluttering from her numb fingers. Xavier, who had been working outside, came running when he heard her cry out. "What is it? What happened?" Wordlessly, Rebecca handed him the letter. Xavier read it quickly, his expression shifting from concern to shock to something complicated that she could not quite parse. "Rebecca, I am so sorry." "I do not know what I feel," Rebecca admitted, her voice hollow. "I should be sad, should not I? He was my husband for 7 years, but all I can think is that he left me. He called me crazy and he left me, and now he is dead and I never got the chance to prove him wrong. I never got the chance to make him see what he did to me." Xavier knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. "You have nothing to prove to a dead man. What he did was wrong. How he treated you was wrong. His death does not change that, and it does not obligate you to any particular feeling. You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to be relieved. You are allowed to feel whatever you feel." Rebecca looked into his eyes and saw only understanding there, no judgment, no expectation. "I am relieved," she whispered, as if confessing a terrible secret. "Is that awful? No. It is honest, and honesty is something you should always be able to have with me." They buried the letter, and with it, the last of Rebecca's ties to her old life. She was a widow now, free to marry again whenever she chose. But she and Xavier agreed to wait, to let the dust settle, to let the town gossip die down. There was no rush. They had all the time in the world. The summer passed in hard work and quiet joy. With help from neighbors and Xavier's tireless efforts, they rebuilt the barn, even bigger and sturdier than before. The ranch began to prosper again. They bought more cattle, expanded the garden, made improvements to the house. And through it all, Rebecca and Xavier grew closer. They worked side by side during the day and sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and quirks, building a foundation of trust and friendship that went deeper than passion. Though there was plenty of that too. Once enough time had passed that Rebecca felt comfortable taking that step. Victor was convicted of arson and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, his property sold at auction to pay his debts. Clara Mitchell bought some of his land, expanding her own farm. The rest was divided among several smaller ranchers who had been intimidated by Victor for years. In September, almost exactly a year after Thomas had left his cruel note, Xavier proposed to Rebecca. He did it simply, without fanfare, as they stood together near the creek that ran through their property. "I love you," he said, taking her hands in his. "I love your strength and your courage. I love your laugh and your stubbornness. I love the life we have built together. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you if you will let me. Will you marry me, Rebecca?" "Yes," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in October in a small ceremony in Weaverville, with Clara and Sheriff Morrison standing as witnesses. Rebecca wore a simple blue dress and carried wildflowers from their property. Xavier wore his best suit and looked at her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her softly, reverently, and Rebecca felt as though she was finally, truly home. Their wedding night was everything Rebecca had dreamed of and more. Xavier was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, building pleasure together until they both shattered in each other's arms. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Xavier traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Rebecca replied honestly. "A year ago I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything. But I found you instead. I found myself." "I am the lucky one," Xavier murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I spent 30 years looking for something I could not name. Turns out I was looking for you." The first winter of their marriage was cold but cozy. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply being together. Xavier taught Rebecca to play chess, and she taught him to cook her mother's recipes. They made love frequently and enthusiastically, learning what pleased each other, building intimacy in layers. In the spring, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with both joy and terror. She had never been pregnant before, had begun to think maybe she could not have children. But here she was, carrying Xavier's child, and the magnitude of it overwhelmed her. Xavier's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He was thrilled and terrified in equal measure, hovering over her solicitously, driving her crazy with his concern. But underneath it all was such profound love and excitement that Rebecca could not stay annoyed with him for long. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked him one night as they lay in bed, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "Then we will face it together," Xavier said firmly. "But nothing is going to go wrong. You are strong, and so is this baby. We are going to be fine." His confidence bolstered her own, and as her pregnancy progressed, Rebecca felt more excitement than fear. She was going to be a mother. She and Xavier were creating a family together. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. The baby came in December, in the midst of a cold snap that left frost on the windows and the world hushed with snow. Clara came to help with the birth along with the town midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Wu. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly a full day. Xavier paced outside, barred from the birthing room by tradition but clearly beside himself with worry. Every time Rebecca cried out, he flinched as if he had been struck. But finally, as the sun rose on a cold December morning, a baby's wail filled the house. Mrs. Wu came out a few minutes later, smiling tiredly. "You have a son, Mr. Sutton, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife did beautifully. She is tired but well." Xavier did not wait for permission. He pushed past the midwife and into the bedroom where Rebecca lay exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Xavier," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Come meet our son." Xavier approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the baby in Rebecca's arms. The infant was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "He is perfect," Xavier breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "He is absolutely perfect, just like his mother." "Do you want to hold him?" Rebecca asked, and Xavier nodded, unable to speak. She passed the baby to him carefully, showing him how to support the head. Xavier looked down at his son with such wonder and love that Rebecca felt fresh tears spill over. This man, this good, strong, loving man, was her husband. This baby was their child. This life was theirs, built from the ashes of her worst moments, transformed into something more beautiful than she had ever imagined. "What should we name him?" Xavier asked, gently rocking the baby. "I was thinking Daniel," Rebecca said, "after your uncle who raised you. The man who taught you to be the person you are." Xavier looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Daniel Sutton, I love it. Uncle Daniel would have been honored." They settled into life as a family with surprising ease. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Xavier proved to be a devoted father. He would wake in the night to bring the baby to Rebecca for feeding, would pace the floor soothing him when he was fussy, would sit and stare at his son with such wonder that it made Rebecca's heart ache with love. The ranch continued to prosper. With Xavier's hard work and Rebecca's sharp business sense, they expanded their operation, buying more land when it became available, building their herd, becoming one of the more successful ranches in the valley. But they never became like Victor, never let success make them cruel or greedy. They treated their workers fairly, helped their neighbors when needed, and contributed to the community that had eventually supported them. As the years passed, they added 2 more children to their family, a daughter named Sarah and another son named James. The house that had once felt empty and sad became filled with laughter and life. Rebecca watched her children grow, watched them play in the same fields where she had once felt so alone and frightened, and marveled at how much had changed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took her back to the spot where he had proposed, where the creek ran clear and bright through their land. The children were staying with Clara for the night, giving them rare time alone. "You remember the first day we met?" Xavier asked as they sat together on the creek bank, the autumn sun warm on their faces. "Of course. You caught Thomas's note when the wind took it. I have thought about that day so many times over the years. What if I had not stopped? What if I had just delivered that letter and ridden on? I would have missed everything. This life, these children, I would have missed the best thing that ever happened to me." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I used to think that day was the worst day of my life. Thomas leaving, being called crazy, losing everything I thought I had. But it was actually the beginning of everything good. It brought me you." "He was crazy for leaving you," Xavier said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "But I will be grateful to him every day for the rest of my life, because his loss was my gain." "Our gain," Rebecca corrected. "We found each other. We built this life together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water flow past, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Xavier spoke again. "I want you to know something, Rebecca. Every day with you has been a gift. Every moment of this life we have built has been more than I ever dreamed possible. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you even more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you." Rebecca turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. She could see the passage of time in the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. More so, because now she knew the depth of his character, the strength of his love. "And you are my miracle," she said softly. "The answer to prayers I did not know how to pray. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed me when everyone else thought I was crazy. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me back myself, Xavier, and then you gave me so much more." They kissed then, a kiss that held 10 years of love and commitment, of challenges faced together and joys shared. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Xavier said, standing and offering her his hand. "Let us go home." Home. The word had never sounded sweeter. Rebecca took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, and together they walked back toward the ranch house that had witnessed such sorrow and such joy, such fear and such love. Their children were waiting for them the next morning, bursting with stories about their night at Clara's. Daniel, now 9 years old, was tall and serious like his father. Sarah, 7, was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything. And James, just 4, was a whirlwind of energy and mischief. Rebecca watched Xavier chase James around the yard, the little boy shrieking with laughter, and felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life now. This love, this family, this home that she and Xavier had fought for and built together. She thought sometimes about Thomas, wondered if he had any regrets in those final moments before his death. She hoped he had found some peace, but she did not dwell on it. That was the past, and she had learned the hard way that the past could trap you if you let it. Better to focus on the present, on the blessings she had been given, on the future she was building with every choice she made. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier looked over at her and smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. He excused himself from the game with James and came to where she stood on the porch, sliding an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How lucky I am," Rebecca replied honestly. "How grateful, me too," Xavier murmured. "Every single day." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths. Daniel grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking, eventually taking on more responsibilities at the ranch. Sarah became a teacher, opening a small school in Weaverville. James, true to his childhood nature, became a scout, always looking for the next adventure. Rebecca and Xavier grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they had defended and cultivated, holding hands with the easy comfort of decades of partnership. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of noise and laughter, 3 generations of family coming together. Rebecca stood in her kitchen, preparing food with Sarah's help, and marveled at the life she had built. "You look happy, Mama," Sarah said, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. "I am, sweetheart. I am happier than I ever thought possible." "Tell me again how you and Papa met," Sarah said, as she had asked dozens of times over the years. Rebecca smiled, the story as vivid in her mind as if it had happened yesterday. "It was the worst day of my life, or so I thought at the time. Your father rode up to deliver a letter, and he caught a note that the wind had taken from my hand. He read it, and then he said something that changed everything." "What did he say?" He said, "He is crazy for leaving you." And in that moment, I felt seen for the first time in so long. I felt believed, and I knew somehow that everything was going to be all right. Sarah smiled, her eyes bright. "That is so romantic, Mama." "It was. It is. Your father saved me in more ways than one, Sarah. He gave me back my life, my faith in myself, my belief that I deserved to be loved and respected. And then he gave me all of you, the greatest gifts I could ever receive. They finished preparing the meal and called everyone to the table. Xavier sat at the head, Rebecca at his side, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. As they held hands to say grace, Rebecca felt Xavier squeeze her fingers gently, and she squeezed back, a silent communication perfected over 30 years together. After the meal, as the sun began to set, Rebecca and Xavier slipped away from the crowd and walked out to the creek, to their special spot. It had become a tradition over the years to steal moments alone together here, to reconnect and remember. 30 years, Xavier said, shaking his head in wonder. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. We have lived a good life, Rebecca replied, leaning against him. A very good life. The best life, Xavier agreed. And it is all because you were brave enough to fight for yourself and generous enough to let me fight beside you. We fought together, Rebecca said. That is what made all the difference. You never tried to fight for me, you fought with me. You saw me as an equal partner from the very beginning. You are my equal in every way that matters, Xavier said seriously. You are my partner, my best friend, my great love. You have made every day of these 30 years worthwhile. They stood together in the gathering dusk, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family from the ashes of betrayal and loss. The ranch house glowed with lamplight behind them, full of the family they had created together. The land stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful, the result of decades of hard work and dedication. I would do it all again, Rebecca said softly. Every struggle, every challenge, every hard moment. I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you. As would I, Xavier replied, tipping her face up to his for a gentle kiss. As would I, my love. They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to rejoin their family, to celebrate 30 years of marriage and the countless blessings those years had brought. And as they stepped through the door into the warmth and light and laughter, Rebecca felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had survived betrayal and found true love. She had been called crazy and proven her sanity beyond any doubt. She had lost everything and gained so much more. She had faced down bullies and built a thriving ranch. She had raised 3 beautiful children and was now being blessed with grandchildren. And through it all, she had Xavier by her side, her partner in every sense of the word, her great love, her home. The note that Thomas had left all those years ago, the one that declared her crazy, had long since been burned. But Rebecca remembered the words, remembered the pain they had caused. And she remembered Xavier's response, the words that had changed everything. He is crazy for leaving you. Those words had been a lifeline when she needed one most. They had been the beginning of a love story that had lasted 30 years and would last the rest of their lives. They had been the start of everything good that came after. As Rebecca looked around at her family, at the home she and Xavier had built together, at the life they had created from nothing but determination and love, she felt nothing but gratitude. The past was the past, with all its pain and betrayal. But the present was beautiful and the future was bright. She had been called crazy once, by a man too cowardly to face his own failures. But she had been called beloved far more often, by a man who saw her clearly and loved her completely. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Rebecca Graham Sutton had found her happily ever after, not in spite of her trials, but because of them. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected man. And she had learned that sometimes the worst day of your life is just the beginning of the best days yet to come. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Rebecca found herself standing on the porch once more, looking out at the land she loved. Xavier joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the question he had asked her countless times over the years. Rebecca smiled and leaned into his embrace. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive. I am thinking that every struggle was worth it to get here. I am thinking that I love you more than words can say, Xavier Sutton, and I always will." Xavier pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and she felt him smile against her hair. "I love you too, Rebecca. Today, tomorrow, and forever." They stood together in the twilight, two souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built a life of love and purpose and joy. Behind them, their family laughed and talked, the legacy of their love made manifest. Before them, the land they had defended and cultivated stretched out beneath the stars, a testament to their hard work and determination. And in that moment, with Xavier's arms around her and her family close by, Rebecca Graham Sutton knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live, with exactly the man she was meant to love. Her husband had left a note saying she was crazy. A cowboy had read it and said he was crazy for leaving her. And from those simple words, a love story had been born, a life had been transformed, and a legacy had been created that would endure for generations to come. It was, Rebecca thought as Xavier kissed her softly in the starlight, the perfect ending to a story that had begun in heartbreak and ended in hope. It was, quite simply, the happy ending she had always deserved but never dared to believe she would find. And she would cherish it, and him, and this beautiful life they had built together for all the days to come.